Well, welcome, Towson University alumni, faculty, staff, and friends and students. I'm Steve Rosenfeld, the Director of Alumni Communication and Recognition. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this ASRM panel discussion. We're very excited about today's event, which is co-sponsored by the TU Actuarial Science and Risk Management Advisory Board, the ASRM Club, and the Office of Alumni Relations. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and will be shared with all registrants when it is finalized through the alumni YouTube channel. Attendees will remain muted throughout the discussion. If you have any questions, please use the chat function at the bottom right of your window, and we will ask the questions on your behalf at the conclusion of the presentation. Please make sure you direct your questions to everyone so that everyone sees your questions and we make sure the panelists can get to them in an orderly fashion. I'd like to begin by introducing our moderator for today's event, Catherine Gavin. Catherine is a 1998 alum of the ASRM program at Towson. In 2000, she began her career at T. Rowe Price as a quantitative analyst in the Equity Research Division and has worked her way up to working as the firm's, currently managing the firm's advertising, creative, and media agencies within the Global Brand Marketing Division. Please welcome Catherine Gavin.
Thanks. I think I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Steve, and welcome everybody. I was just looking down the attendee list and I saw some familiar names. So welcome to those I have met and to those that I haven't yet. We do look forward to having an event in person, obviously, as everybody is looking forward to that. But appreciate you coming here during your lunch hour on a Friday. And, you know, I just wanted to spend a minute or two talking about what we hope to accomplish here and where the idea of this panel came from. Steve mentioned, I'm on the advisory board of the Actuarial Science Risk Management program at Towson University, and our board met in early February, and we were just sharing stories across our board members about aha moments, things we've learned, things we've had to adjust to in the pandemic, and then also thinking that we used to have this in-person event where we would bring together current students, alumni, faculty, industry professionals for networking, sharing information that's helpful to all of those different audience segments, and thought, well, you know what, we're not going to get together in person this year, so let's just do something virtual, and here we are. So anyway, what I wanted to do now is just to kind of run through, I'm not going to read the bios for our panelists, but it was in the appointment. We'll have it up on the screen here. But just walk through the different roles that we thought would be interesting to include in a panel discussion to provide information, as I said, to the various audience segments that we have. So first we'll hear from a current actuarial science risk management student, Katie Sacco. And she's going, we thought, wouldn't it be interesting for employers, for faculty, for, board members to listen to a student and some of the things that a current student had to pivot from being in person on campus to then 100% virtual to then some kind of hybrid, Zoom and video and virtual study groups and things like that. So Katie's going to share some of that with us. Then we thought, well, as far as folks that were, students of the program and have, moved into the workforce, but not for a long time because, somebody like me who's been at the same company for 20 years, it was a little easier adjustment for me to move to 100% virtual for the past 13 months. But, we have Schuyler Call, who is a 2020 graduate. And then we have Mark DeBastiani, who is a 2019 graduate from the program. So relatively new in their professions and their careers and had to do this pivot. So some of the things that they'll share with us will be around those transitions. So then we thought, well, okay, we've got some students covered. Now let's think about some of the perspectives from the faculty and, how do you teach and transfer knowledge in a different environment. So we have Dr. Michael O'Leary, who is the mathematics department at Towson University. And we also have, we're going to have Mustafa Pemi, who is also in the faculty of the mathematics department. and, to hopefully share some of the experiences with how do you connect with students? How do you, what are some of the challenges that they were facing, but also, how do you get a sense for the mastery of the information that you're relaying to your students? So we'll hear from them. And then finally, two of our actuarial science risk management board members, John Shadow, who works for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, even in that industry, will share accounts of what it's been like in his respective industry, working, interviewing, even managing an internship program on the front lines. And then we also have the chair of our board, Simeon Williams, who works at Transamerica, and he'll be sharing some perspectives as well, given the fact that maybe there have been some slight alterations to programs that Transamerica had in the past, and then thinking about how they move into the next phase of this pandemic and recovery. All right, so let's see. As Steve mentioned, there's a chat function in the bottom here. If I'm going to be monitoring that as our panelists are talking, and hopefully we'll capture any of the questions as we go. If not, feel free to use that chat, and then as we round out the panelists, we will try to address anything that we maybe hadn't gotten to, and just make sure that everybody finds this just a really helpful and productive time during your lunch break. Okay, so let's get started with Katie. Wherever you'd like to start, I know you probably have given some thought to this, and I don't want to telegraph where you're going, so I'll just kick it over to Katie.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. So I am a current student at Towson. I'm a senior, graduating this spring in about a month. And so today I want to talk a little bit on how students really had to adapt to a couple different things. First off, we obviously had to adapt to online classes. And then something else we had to adapt to is dealing with loss of opportunities and loss of the social interaction and networking that we normally would have had in person. So first, I'm going to start with online classes. Obviously, I think it's pretty clear that it's harder to learn online than inside the classroom. And there's a lot more distractions when you're at home. There's a lot more missing the human touch, that human interaction. And it's a lot harder to get students to interact with professors online, I've found. And especially for math, I find it's really difficult because when you think of a traditional math classroom, you think of people like in a room, there's like a blackboard and they're writing out their notes for their equations or whatever on the whiteboard or blackboard or whatever. And in person, that's really great because it gives students a time to really sink in all the information. Whereas online, a lot of professors have either their class notes and they scroll through them and they read through them, or they have like a PowerPoint. And while these are useful information and great ways to summarize information, it's harder to process that information as quickly because instead of having it written out slowly, because when you write you have to slow down, it happens faster. So even though you might have questions, you won't realize you have questions until you go home later. And that's kind of a problem. So I found that we adapt to that by spending a lot more time outside of class trying to get to through those difficulties. We do that using a couple different ways. I found that in the ASRM program, a lot of people use ADAPT to help bridge that. They do adapt and learn. There's a lot, even though there's less communication in person, I mean, not in person, but like during the class because it's hard to interact. I found that I email my professors a lot more asking questions because I realized later that I had that question that I didn't have earlier because I didn't realize I had the question earlier. And then we also have a lot of student group chats for discussing things that we don't understand. So like, for example, in my senior seminar class, we're learning we're doing some R coding. And whenever somebody has a problem, we jump into like a Blackboard Collaborate group and we work through it together because we find that we can bounce off the ideas together. So I think through this online experience, we've definitely learned how to be resourceful, how to collaborate, and how to we've gained some communication skills. Another huge thing that has impacted online students now is losing internships or changing internships. I know for the people who were lucky enough to keep theirs, that it was a different experience than they really initially wanted. I know that they're very thankful they have them. but that they miss that in-person interaction and being in an office, having that experience, because for a lot of people, that's the first time they ever go through that. So missing that kind of is disappointing, but we deal with what we have to deal with. For me, I actually lost my internship, which led to a lot of stress. But again, you learn to be resourceful, and you try to look for opportunities elsewhere. And if there aren't any, then you have to find them yourself. So a lot of things that I did is that I went online and I started learning Python and data science, and got jump starts on doing IFM. That was the next test I'm taking, so I started to look into that. So again, it shows that I think the students who have been impacted by this, the ones who really stuck around and worked through it, are very resourceful and hardworking people who really, we could stick together. The last thing is, like I said, the loss of the social experience and the networking. Obviously, we're missing out on our friends, but seeing that in a career perspective, like I said, we made a lot of group chats. We definitely worked together to get through this. And I mean, honestly, I don't think I could have gotten through most of my classes without talking to my classmates and being like, okay, wait, so what happened here? What did he do? So yeah, and then also we have our ASRM club meetings, which have been really great. We had the ASRM internship and job fair, which was wonderful. So I think overall, employers and recruiters and even professors, anyone who's looking to either hire someone from 2021 or see them as a grad student or anything like that, you should expect good communication skills. You should expect adaptability and resourcefulness. Something you might lose a little bit on, and it's not really, I don't think anyone's fault, is that you're going to miss some of that experience. Like, we didn't get the internships, or if we did, they were lesser. So just expect that, and try not to penalize people because it's a hard time. Yeah, and we're all very eager to do something. Like, as a student, I feel that eagerness to get out there and actually do things, because we've been so cooped up and tried to just be a student for so long. So I think we're all reared and ready to go. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. This is exactly what we were hoping to bring. There was a couple things that you said that just really resonated with me that I hadn't thought about. I may write things down, generally not type, and you're right, it slows you down. It helps you think, it helps you to kind of process things, and I hadn't even thought of that with a virtual, experience with learning. So I love that perspective. But then also I think a lot of employers might be a little concerned with, are they mastering the information? But you covered that very well by talking about having to be resourceful, because, you have to find ways to get around that and overcome that. So I'm really excited to hear from a student, and I hope that those who are on the call listening from potentially an employer's perspective can gain a lot from that. So thank you. Okay, so let's see. Next, Shyler and Mark, I know we didn't state whether, how you wanted to handle this. So feel free to come off mute. And from a perspective of being relatively new in the workforce, well experienced in the topics and the knowledge, I'm sure, but anything you want to share with us from that perspective?
Yep, I can go first.
Okay.
So yes, I graduated from Towson in the spring of 2019, and then I began working at Transamerica that summer. So I think I've been working in the so I worked in the office for about, I think 9 months before we moved to working from home. One of the immediate benefits or the nice things about working from home is I didn't have to commute anymore. So that saved me about 2 hours a day that I could sleep in or study or just relax. I think early on I did struggle with my internet connection. That was the one technical aspect that didn't really work in the beginning. I used to live in a rural area with bad internet, so it was hard to connect to all the drives and all the files that I needed. But other than that, Transamerica did a really good job of making sure that our technology, worked as it should. I don't think we saw any real delays in our production once we moved to working from home. So that was really good. So I kind of wanted to touch a little bit about exams from working from home, and then also just the social aspects and how that's changed. So I did study for 2 exams during all of COVID. I guess it's still going on. PA, which I took that summer that we started working from home, and then ERM, which is a few days away now. So I actually found studying to be a little bit more challenging working from home. It's easier in that aspect that I had more time because I wasn't commuting. But I found it difficult to separate from work to studying and then to relaxing because everything is in my living room. And so I found myself, deviating from my study schedule a little bit more because it's easy just to go sit on the couch and not study, or it's easy to, if you're studying on the same computer, to look at something from work. So I just found it a little difficult to separate there. So I think my biggest advice there is to, really devise a study schedule, stick to it as best as you can. And I really found that having separate physical locations for working, like I have a desk for work, I have a desk for studying, and then, the rest of my apartment is for relaxing. But I found that to be really helpful. As for work, I think the biggest thing that changed was just how flexible that the company and all of its employees had to be. I know my team, we had a few new responsibilities once we started working from home. A lot of teams at Transamerica use Bloomberg terminals to access data, and they didn't have access to those terminals once we went remote. But my team was one of the few that had remote access. So one of our new responsibilities is helping any other teams with data requests that they might have. So that's just an example of teams working together in ways that we didn't used to before. And then I wanted to touch on socializing. So my team is really small and we're really close. There's only about 6 of us. So we'd have lots of celebrations with our team and some other teams, like birthdays, happy hours, celebrating good job completing a project, stuff like that. And once we went remote, that really dropped off significantly in the beginning. Eventually, we did start planning happy hour calls. I think we do those about twice a month, where we spend an hour. We like trivia games. We do that a lot, and we'll also just catch up on what's happening in the world. So that's really nice. My team also did plan a physical meetup during all of COVID. We went to Roland Park, which is right next to Towson. And we hiked the trails. We had like a show and tell sort of thing where we brought an item and we had to talk about that item and like a story about ourselves that we didn't think our teammates knew. And so that was a really great experience, getting to see everybody again in person and also getting to meet some of our new team members that we hadn't met yet since we went remote. So I think it's really important that we continue to try and socialize with teammates and people while we're working remote. And that's a really big piece of advice I have to anybody who's starting an internship this summer or going full-time this summer, is to make sure you put in the effort to socialize with your teammates. I think the best way is video calls. Not everybody's comfortable with that, but so audio calls are fine. I really think we lose the personal touch when we just IM each other back and forth. You lose that tone. You're not as apt to maybe talk about. You just lose the personal touch, I think. So I suggest, try suggesting happy hour calls if your team doesn't do that. Trivia games are really fun. I think it'll just make work more enjoyable for you and for your teammates. I think it'll help the interns also kind of stand out and see that they can mesh with that team. So I think that's a really big key advice.
Well, thanks, and good luck on the exam coming up. I love that separate physical locations, because trying to compartmentalize between work, studying, social, it's something you need to figure out. And it sounds like you've done some really strong things to work through that. Okay, so Shyler, seeing you come off mute, so you're up.
All right, so Mark and I had kind of similar experiences, but fortunately I have a couple different things I can share with people. I was fortunate enough to intern at Transamerica before I started working full time. So I was fortunate enough to know people. And Simeon knows this. When I was running into problems setting up my whole work from home environment, it was very convenient for me just to reach out to people and ask for help with in that regard. Getting stuff like hardware mailed to my house, my VPN set up, issues with internet or other things, access to different network drives and such. It was really helpful to have that connection with people initially, because if I didn't have that, I probably would have been stuck for a little while longer. Given that the work from home environment had just recently started, I started working full time in June, and they had only gone home a few months earlier. They were trying to get a lot of stuff figured out for all the newly onboarded employees. Um, I also kind of had the benefit of working in 3 different departments over the past 11 months. So I worked under Simeon for a few months. That I don't think was too severely impacted in terms of the workload for working from home. A lot of the people that I interacted with actually were in the Midwest. So I would have had remote interactions with them regardless, being in the Baltimore area. The second team I worked for, they were also all in the Midwest, but they typically didn't have people outside of that office location work for their team because they'd had several like physical things that they had in the office that they dealt with on a regular basis during their year-end processes. So there was one struggle, excuse me, that we came across where we had to compare a lot of things from this year to the prior year. And when they documented those things, they were physically printed out and stored in binders in the office. So it was a little bit of a struggle. Fortunately, we were able to go in and get these things, but it was a little bit of a struggle initially. Having a physical paper database, for lack of a better word, um, with a lot of stuff when we transitioned to a remote environment. And then now I'm on a third team. I just recently rotated. I was in a temporary rotation for a little bit, another result of COVID and other things. And a lot of their processes were pretty much online to begin with, so we don't have that those sort of struggles too much. And one thing I like about this team is they are very set on trying to get a little bit more of a personal interaction, despite the virtual environment. Like we'll have kind of less formal, like camera on meet. We'll call them camera on meetings, like a Thursday or Friday during the week, and it'll be not so much a meeting about what we're working on, what we're going to be working on, the plans moving forward. It's more personal stuff, what we're doing over the weekend, fun stuff that happened in our lives, whatever current events may have happened. So we'll get that sort of personal interaction that way. And then I just want to touch on one more thing, because I know I'm coming up on my time, is a little bit of advice for people who are about to enter the workforce into a remote environment, and that's how to develop relationships with their coworkers in a virtual environment. And a lot of the time, you as the new hire have to reach out to people for everything, whether it be help or just basic human interaction that you don't have because you're working in an isolated room by yourself. So there are some times where I will just message a coworker or someone that I interned with, or someone else that I know, and we'll just talk casually about stuff. I'll congratulate them, like, hey, I saw you passed exam, whatever, congrats. And then we'll just talk about whatever else for a little bit. And it's not too much of a distraction messaging back and forth. You're still able to get work done too. So it's not like you stopped working for half an hour to talk to someone, but you really need to take the initiative to reach out to people to develop more personal relationships. So that way it's just not strictly business with everyone you know.
Well, that's fantastic. And we heard Katie talk about the skills that these students had to develop just out of sheer necessity in communication. So it sounds like those skills that she had talked about are really important. You continue on that path as you head into the workforce. But happy hours and hikes, we're trying to do them. We're trying to do the virtual happy hours too, but I loved, I had written it down, but I forgot to reiterate it, what Mark said about the hike at Lake Roland. That sounds awesome. I'm going to suggest that to my team. And then my boss recently retired after 25 years at T-Row, and I was warned that I have boxes upon boxes of physically printed materials that will be waiting for me at my desk as he was shepherding those to the next generation. So All right, we don't have any questions, so feel free, folks, if you are having some questions. It sounds like we're covering a lot of great stuff, and we're going to head to get some perspectives from the Towson University faculty. So Dr. O'Leary, do you want to start off? I know Simeon had kind of had some conversations about what we were looking to cover, but really anything you want to share with the group would be awesome.
Happy to help. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Mike O'Leary. I'm the department chair. And so as a department chair, I manage responsible for curriculum, scheduling, physical space, student questions. So if you're a student who's got some really complicated graduation thing going on, if your advisor can't handle it, I'm the person you come to. If you are having trouble with something, if you need a scheduling question, if your advisor can't handle it, I'm the person it goes. Well, actually, if your advisor or Min Deng can't handle it, Professor Deng, of course, handles all the hard questions. I just get those that remain at the end. So Simeon asked me as part of the preparation to sort of, provide a personal story and sort of how does the pandemic impact a university department. I miss students. I mean, it's anyone who's ever gone to a college campus during the semester knows it is just full of people and activities. And if you go now, it's not as much fun, right? I miss the students. And the key thing about students being on campus, and this is sort of the hardest job as a department chair, is how do you manage, maintain, develop, foster community, right? How do we get students talking with students? How do we get faculty talking with faculty? How do we do things across, in a typical semester, the math department will have 5,000 students. How do we help all of those folks get in touch with one another? Imagine you're an incoming freshman taking all your classes from home. This is a challenge. So we've done a couple of things. One of the things I want to reach out to folks, and maybe you haven't participated, maybe you don't know about it, but we actually set up a Discord server for the mathematics department for students. It is student run, it is student led, it is student organized. It's not as exciting as I'd like it to be, but we keep putting stuff there. I'm hoping it'll grow. I use Discord for almost all of my classes. And so I get students sending me little DMs at all. In fact, I'm shocked that none of them have DM'd me during this meeting. But I think it's a great way to build a sense of community for inside a class. I use it when I do group projects and when I do sort of class events. In terms of the classroom experience, the hardest thing I think for faculty is how do you redesign your educational experience to account for the fact that you don't have students in a face-to-face room. So we've done a lot of thinking over the last summer about how we want to do things a little bit differently. In my personal classes, I focused much more on projects, much more on smaller assignments, and less on examinations and sort of big ticket. You can't proctor things anymore, not online, you just can't. And so we've been, at least in my classes, I'll be curious how Dr. Pemi does his, but that's been the approach I've been taking in my classes. So above all else, it's a sense of community. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're missing. But I did, talking about community, I wanted to throw out one more chance to build community. So I'm going to put something in the chat. How's that? See, no one else has put something in the chat, but I will. Tomorrow, starting 10 o'clock in the morning, Spring 2021 Regional Undergraduate Mathematics Research Conference. Now, I know a lot of our actuaries don't do the sort of stuff that leads to undergraduate research in mathematics, but many of you do. Many of you may have friends who are working on this project. So we are going to have a whole bunch of folks giving presentations, not just from Towson. We've got students from all across the Mid-Atlantic giving presentations. It's free. Just register, just sign up, come by and hear what your fellow students are doing.
Great, thanks so much. I don't want to click now because I'm afraid I might mess up the whole windows I've got going on here, but I'll save that for later. So thank you. And then Mustafa, would you like to offer other perspectives? Yeah, I think you're come off
Yes,
mute.
thank you very much for inviting me. It's a very good panel and well designed. So I've had experience with online before COVID. I've taught a lot of classes, mostly graduate classes for workers, and there we only do online. Of course, they sign up for that, so they know what it means, and they are ready for that. So, but when we move for online for everybody, and it was very challenging, mostly for our students and for us, because of course, as Mike and also some students say, we lost the connection, which helps a lot because you can track if your students are following just by seeing them in class. So here, the most, what we lost more is to know if they are with us. So I try all tools because we had panel at our department to see how we can help. So we came up with some strategies, asked them to turn on the camera, do this, do that. Even that is not working. It's very difficult to maintain a good following from our students. Some of them excel in this environment, but majority are pretty much struggling. And that's only the first part. The worst part is when we come to exams. Even Mike has received a ton of email complaints from a student because it's difficult to proctor online exam, mostly for undergrad. In my other classes, graduate level class, of course, they are online, and I give them take-home exam for 1 week. Those are usually project or research questions, right? So it's easy, you know, you have 1 week, and it's good enough, you keep them busy. But for a 2 hours in-class test where you ask them questions that are pretty much in the book or where they can easily find an answer by Googling something, it's very difficult to maintain a kind of a honest environment where you can assess if they actually master the material. So I came up with some sort of middle road strategy where I kind of give them a test which is a little bit longer, not longer, a little bit, which will keep them busy, right? Because I say, if the student is busy during the time of the test, he or she won't have time to reach for help left and right. Because those who reach for help usually will not finish the exam. And on the other side, I put a kind of a stopgap. So if you don't return on time, you get penalized. That's the only way I try to maintain some sort of academic honesty, because it's very difficult for us to assign grade to students, knowing that some of them did not earn the grade properly. It makes you feel very bad. So whenever I have those kind of issues, I can't sleep at night. So I've had cases where I definitely know that these two students did something wrong. Maybe they communicate and then they got a very strange wrong answer, but I don't have all the tools to go ahead and punish them because I'm not sure. I just have some suspicion. So by doing this, we are trying to minimize those type of stuff. Now, of course, in the flip side, so this makes some of our exam kind of not very good. So the grade, I think I have some of our students here, even Sapwish is one of our best students anyway. So the grade is not the best. So now I came up with another strategy. So, okay, because I found that students don't pay attention, they don't follow, and they rarely ask questions. That's the worst part. So now when you ask them a question, you found out that most of them are not following. They are there in class, the camera is on, maybe you're watching a movie or doing something else. So it's like you surprise them by a question. So I say, now, if I ask a question and you give me the good answer, I give you 10 points of the test or 5 points. And sometimes I've been finding it difficult to give those points. So I say, it's a 5 point here, just give me an answer. So I'm here to give you those points. So because most of them were not ready for this type of instruction, right? So mostly for undergrad students. So they were not ready, and we really need to go back to in-person instruction as soon as possible, because we are hurting our students. They are not getting everything. But in the good side, because we are giving them online lecture all the time, we are able to cover a ton of material. For example, this semester, I've covered stuff that I've never covered before. So they had a lot of stuff to study, but will they be studying? I don't know. So we had the online office hour. I only have one student in my among the actual science cohort that came to the office hour, and toward the end, she even stopped coming to the office hour. So to students, I'm not taking advantage of what we are offering to help them. So I don't know, maybe it's part because of the structure, it's online, you have to log in, all this kind of stuff, but we'll try our best, I myself, but I think it will be better to resume to in-person instruction as soon as possible, whenever it's medically safe, because the online is not the best, mostly for undergrad. That's why I can say might touch on multiple points, but as long as we can return to in-person, I think we will help our students much better that way.
Yeah. Listening to that, I'm thinking through all the conversation we've had so far during this time, and, from Katie describing not having a blackboard, right? But to be there physically in the space and working through those things. And then, what you're describing, you could be doing all kinds of things that even though you're in the space. And so I think there's a whole lot of opportunity for figuring out ways that this works, but also, yes, Dr. Larry, I do want to see people on campus. I'm close to the university physically where my house is, and I just can't wait to see people walking around campus and heading to class and interacting. I do think that plenty of young adults are figuring it out, but there are plenty that are struggling. So thanks so much for that perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, great. So lastly, I think John was going to start us off with some industry perspective. John?
Catherine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how COVID has affected things at our work, and I work for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So it's had both an impact on the way we do work and on the programs themselves pretty significantly. So in terms of the work processes, how we do our job, we were set up pretty well in the first place to deal with something like this. We have everyone in the agency has laptops that are portable and they can take with them at any time. A large portion of the agency was working 1 or 2 days a week from home prior to the pandemic. And then right before the pandemic, when this was sort of, the writing was on the wall, this kind of thing was coming and we might have to go remote, the agency did large scale testing. So large groups of people would stay at home and they tested the capacity of the networks to handle that kind of thing. We've got about 6,000 people working for the agency. So they wanted to make sure that we had the capacity to handle large numbers of people working at home. So when everything closed down and everybody went home, things were pretty seamless. We had a very smooth transition. Everything worked the way it should work. They even, if you wanted extra monitors at home, they could mail us extra monitors, those kinds of things. So things work-wise were set up pretty well. And that also helped with, in terms of hiring of new employees, interns, those kinds of things. For us, those programs went off the same as they did prior to the pandemic. We hired interns, we had new employees, everything that we had done before, everything just continued. The big thing, as a number of folks have talked about already, is sort of that interpersonal stuff. We've got all the tools, we've got Zoom, WebEx, all these different nice tools, but it's still not quite the same as being in the office. For me, it was much easier to have hallway conversations, stop over at somebody's desk, check in with folks during the course of the day. That was a lot easier to do in person. And now that everything was fully remote, you have to put in more of a concerted effort to do those kinds of things, to set up Zoom calls, to set up little meetings with folks to touch base with them. And our interns, of course, felt that challenge as well, not knowing anybody coming in. They're coming in new, they don't know anybody, and everyone's remote, so they don't see anybody face to face. So it was a little bit of a challenge. We probably invited them to more meetings so that they could see more people face to face that way. Some of our interns took it upon themselves, as Shyla mentioned earlier, to have one-on-ones with other folks that they set up via Zoom, and I thought that was great. Reaching out individually to other folks to try to establish contacts and relationships with others within the office. But yeah, and it was really difficult, and we tried. My group's a little bigger. I've got about 40 people in my group, and so setting up things like happy hours, we did those initially, but it's a little more challenging when you got 40 different faces on your screen at the same time. So we had to figure out ways to break it into breakout rooms and smaller groups. And so we did a lot of trivia nights. We set up a Family Feud game where we had reached out to other managers to be those that were surveyed, so that we had survey results and those. So we made up our own games. Those tended to work a little better because you can do the breakout rooms, and then you've only got 5 to 8 people in a breakout room, and so they can have more conversations in that room, in those rooms, and catch up with everybody rather than in a group of 40 people at one time. So those things tended to work out well for us. We are currently still fully remote. Everything is going well work-wise, so the agency does not see a big push to get us back into the building. We are allowed back in the building if we want to, but out of an agency of 6,000 people, I think there's about a couple hundred that go into the building every day. So it's still not too many people in the building. Most are still remote. In terms of the work itself, our work has changed quite a bit during this course of the year. We have spent a lot of time trying to dig into the effects of COVID on our programs. A lot of direct effects on costs, most of which initially were massive reductions in costs. A lot of places, smaller facilities were largely closed. Elective procedures did not occur. And even things you wouldn't think necessarily, people showing up at the ER for heart attacks and strokes were down by 20 to 30% at one point last year. So just things like that, there were big impacts that weren't even directly related to COVID costs themselves, just for other care. And so we had to build up new models that are like, okay, how much of this care is coming back? When is it coming back? Are there going to be lingering effects? Are the people that didn't go to the hospital for their heart attacks or strokes going to be in worse health later on as a result of all those things? So it was a lot of new work and a lot of thinking through those kinds of things for us. And in addition, we need to think about, how long is this going to last? Where are the waves coming in? So we worked a lot with our colleagues at the CDC and other departments, epidemiologists and such, trying to figure out the path of the pandemic, how that was going to affect hospitalizations, mortality, all those kinds of things. And so there were some pretty significant direct changes to our work. And on top of all that, there were a lot of new services. As many of you probably know, there's a huge boost in telehealth services in this past year. A lot of people saw their physician via telehealth as opposed to in person. A lot of change in how practice was done over the last year. So those are sort of the challenges, but being a large government agency, we're sort of used to things changing a lot. So that was more in our area of expertise as to dealing with change, because that's what we do all the time. But the harder part is, as many have mentioned, the interpersonal stuff and trying to make that concerted effort to set up those small Zoom calls and stay in touch with folks. So that's it for me. So I'll turn it back to you, Catherine.
Great. Yeah, and the interpersonal stuff, I get you, but I don't know, like, then you've got like your animals here and your kids sometimes, and the pop-ins in your Zoom call that you unexpected, cats rolling around in the background. All right, well, listen, we have Simeon, who is the chair of our Actuarial Science Risk Management Advisory Board, who is also an industry professional. I'm looking for Simeon, he's still on mute. And if he wants to come off mute and share with us some perspectives from Transamerica, that would be awesome.
Gladly. Thank you, Catherine. So as Catherine said at the onset, this is such an unprecedented time. And one of the great ways to kind of recognize all of the sacrifice and hard work and struggles that people had throughout 2020 was really to come together and let people know, which I've kind of heard this theme a few times now, how important it is and how communication and relationships are even more important than they are now. And so just reminding you that, there's others out there like yourselves, and that a lot of people have really good advice, but have been through the same thing. And so, one of the things I always remember is talking to neighbors and other people, and they comment. One in particular commented that the year of 2020 was when the children finally figured out that the adults don't have a clue. And I took it one step further and I said, well, the kids always knew that the adults didn't know everything, especially as they get closer to teenage years. It's that I think the adults finally figured out that sometimes adults don't know what to do. And I think that was a bigger surprise to a lot of people. So, where do we come out as a civilization, to our tolerance of ambiguity? That's that one question that we always ask a lot of times in our interviews. What is it that shows examples of your tolerance to ambiguity? And here we have this unprecedented event that happened, affects everybody in the world, and literally history is being written every day. So how would one rate, Transamerica, and how would one rate the experience of 2020 when it comes to that tolerance of ambiguity? And I remember hearing about the actual event. We were at a seminar, and at this particular seminar, this was at the end of February. And it's an annual event that's held out in the West, and it's extremely important for the reinsurance industry. And we had already had at that point, at the end of February, 2 big cancellations to an event that usually has 500 to 600 people. And as the event progressed, the town was Las Vegas, and they were completely in denial. This is not something big to worry about. And the event ended and was there for a little while longer, came back on March 10th, March 11th. And that was when the offices closed down. That was when schools started to close down. And so then there's this understanding that, oh, this isn't something that's going to happen just outside of the United States. It's something that's affecting us right now. And from a practical sense, with Transamerica, they stopped having people going to the office and started working from home by mid-March. But what it meant in terms of that community, which Mike, when you were describing that, it reminded me of, here was this center that we had in Baltimore that was key for a lot of purposes, one of which was offering exams. And so that exam setting, I remember talking to the people at the Society of Actuaries, trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Because your center is often the place where people take exams. So with all this ambiguity, as an organization, we have something for the most part that's called a business continuity plan. And so that's put in place. Oftentimes it was a day or sometimes hours before 2020. It would be something like electricity ran out or a bad storm, but this really put that to the test. 2020 and the pandemic really put it to the test. So, one of the things that was key was technology, understanding that was up to the load that's going to be put on it. And, as we were coming through March into the summer and we had to make that decision about the internships, that was such that we decided that, well, to the extent that the intern had already been with us a year, we felt that was okay. Otherwise, we did have to cancel internships. And that was an extremely difficult decision. We knew that there would be lasting implications from that. And so we tried our utmost to make sure that we made the damage as little as we could, so we didn't close it altogether, but then that we wanted to bounce back as well. And so I think one of the biggest things that I've understood as my team is mostly remote before 2020, but now it's even more so, is really understanding how to engage people when you don't have some of those cues. I hear people talk about there's no substitute for being in person, and that's so correct. You really have to pick up on sometimes it's subtle verbal clues, sometimes it's in emails. So I think that sensitivity kind of ratcheted up a bit because you didn't have some of the cues that you otherwise would have normally when you are in person. And then the other item was understanding the sweet spot when it comes to size. Definitely would echo the comments that John, you had mentioned. There's a size that's too big or you don't get a lot of interaction. And so that's got to be so difficult from a professor's perspective, because I've found the size to be rather small. You can't get anywhere probably north of 5 if you really want to have something that's engaging. So I would say, definitely tech is king. Make sure you understand the sweet spot when it comes to the size that you have. And then when it comes to our particular onboard and integration as an organization, we've understood that, get the internships open as quickly as we can. And so that's, we're excited to open that up again this year. And then with full-time, we're on board for, I think it's over a dozen new ADP students. And then when it comes to setting up those first days are so critical, because integration really has to do with those first few hours or first few days. The better integrated you are, the more likely you are to be successful and feel like you're making an impact. And so one thing that we've done is not only done manager training to make sure that managers know how to operate and kind of have best practices in this new virtual world, but we also have what we call setup days. And, Schuyler, I think you would have loved this. What we do is, in the beginning, before you actually even meet with your team, you're going to have 1 to 2 days with our tech team, just to make sure that computer's up to speed, you've got enough bandwidth, iron out all those details, so that when it comes to your first impression that you get with your group, that it's a good one, and then you don't have technical delays. So that, and then I think touch points are extremely important. I've heard that mentioned a lot, but I would just say that not only is it important for the individual, like Schuyler had brought up, I think we make sure that we have, just as a best practice, the whole idea that the faster we can get you integrated, the better. More difficult with the virtual world, but not impossible. So just make sure that there's an understanding. So I guess I'm talking more to the students now as opposed to the employers, but I think that using one's time wisely is so important. I think many people said at the beginning of the pandemic, are you going to come out of it stronger or weaker? And so for a lot of us, I think that meant, what are we going to do with this potential new time that you get from either not having to travel or possibly some tasks that you no longer have? So how did you use that time? And making sure that you got the basics covered. You know, any good professor would tell you, here's the basics that you got to understand for purposes of passing my course. Likewise, there's a set of, you know, technical abilities that's important. But I think what's even more important, or equally important, would be, how do you differentiate yourself from others? And one thing that we've seen from a recruiting perspective is, now that things are going virtual, there's this sense that a lot of other universities are knocking at our door because they understand that their student population is no longer bound necessarily by physical location. And likewise, we have a lot more students that are really playing the field, meaning not just locally. So one thing to understand is, just as you have those same options, I think it's really important to understand that the level of competition has just expanded as well. So no replacement for those physical and instances where you can engage locally. But I think it's definitely a new world. So I'll just leave with, I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities in the future. I think that we've got a lot of uncertainty with regards to how do we work with this virtual workplace. You know, we would hope that for the most part, something that ends, you know, when vaccinations come online. But you guys, in a way, are going to be, I think, really shaping that a lot. In addition to some of the things that John said about what it means in a post-COVID world and what it means to particular products, I think it's important to understand that there's underwriting questions that need to be answered. You know, what do we do when gender goes beyond male, female? What changes does the future consumer have? How do you envision products when it comes to those that actuarial science can help solve? Those are all questions that really need people to step up and answer. So as much as there are challenges, I think there's a lot of opportunities and the potential for people to distinguish themselves in this environment.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Simeon. That was a really good perspective for, you know, I know it was geared a lot towards students and thinking about entering the workforce and some of these activities that are indeed much better in person. So some strategies to think about. But I'm going to let, we're just actually about out of time, but Stephen wanted to close it. And I think we have an attendee that he wanted to mention. There is another Towson event, an exciting one that one of our attendees will be doing in early May. So Stephen, I'll leave it to you.
All right, so thank you so much. I do want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their insights. I hope everyone enjoyed this session. I'd quickly like to thank Chandler Vicchio from the Office of Alumni Relations for helping us coordinate this session. Also, before I get to the special event coming up next week, I want to wish our panelist and TU senior Katie a very happy birthday today. It's a big birthday for her, so hopefully she has a wonderful night and a safe weekend celebrating her birthday. We do hope you all can join us for our upcoming events. The next one we have will be on May 4th. Dr. David Vanko, Dean of the Fisher College of Science and Mathematics, will lead us on a virtual tour of the new science complex. I've seen the building in person, and it is spectacular, so you don't want to miss that event. On May 24th, we'll be hosting a virtual olive oil history and tasting webinar led by a TU alum and a TU professor. You can register for any of our events at alumni.towson.edu/events. Make sure you follow the TU Alumni Association on our social media channels and on Tiger Connect, our alumni community. These details are in your screen currently. Thank you again. I hope to see you all again next time. Have a great weekend, everybody.